So recently, the UN released a report on poverty in the United States. Now, it's a very scathing report, a very damning report that basically said that the administration and their current policies are basically aimed to crush the poor, to punish the poor. They also said that the United States is one of the world's richest nations and a land of opportunity. However, we are fast becoming a champion of inequality. Now, some of the things that they pointed out in this report noted that Americans born into poverty are more than likely to stay that way. So that ladder of advancement has basically been kicked out from under us. More and more Americans just cannot get out of poverty. And right now, about 40 million Americans live in poverty, according to the census. Now, look, that number is made up of people who work, but don't make enough money to live. In case you're wondering, oh no, they're lazy. They're not getting jobs. No. There are people with 2-3 jobs that still live in poverty. And that's the thing that you kind of have to get through to a lot of people because it sounds so unbelievable. What are you talking about? If you have a job, you shouldn't be in poverty, right? Well, it happens, and it happens all over America. And a lot of those people are considered to be underemployed. Now, Trump can sit there and say, oh my God, no, what are you talking about? We have a very, very low unemployment rating, and the economy is booming. Look at the stock market. The stock market is doing fantastic. Well, the unemployment rate, as I've said before, is not a good picture of actual unemployment because it leaves out a lot of people, the people who couldn't find work despite looking. They couldn't find good jobs despite looking and are no longer looking. They're not counted anymore. And of course, the people who are underemployed are also not counted anymore. So that's a huge, huge problem. And we're not doing anything to address that. Now, Nolan English here, he runs an outreach program called Safe House. And he talked to CNN and he said about this, at least 40% of the people we serve are working. They're holding down 2 or 3 jobs, have children. They may be trying to land on someone's couch. Some live in abandoned buildings in their cars. Then they come here and they go on shift. They work. That's a disastrous picture. I mean, imagine somebody who works 2-3 jobs and still can't afford a home. But that's the reality in America. That's the reality in a lot of these bigger cities where the housing prices are insane. You have people that can't afford to live there. And then, of course, you have very, very wealthy people, sometimes coming in from other countries, buying up properties and raising housing values to the point of where most Americans cannot afford to live in these areas anymore. Now, it's not just that. It's not just people who can't afford housing, or it's not just about people who just work, but there are also people who are doing even worse off than those who are just underemployed. More than 5 million Americans, according to the report, live in third world conditions known as absolute poverty here in America. For example, in Lowndes County, Alabama, the report found that residents lacked basic sewage systems. So just imagine, you don't have a sewer system. These are people that are unable to afford to put a septic tank. And of course, some people constructed their own homemade sewage lines using PVC pipes. Now, that is incredibly disastrous. Not only that, but the UN study also found that 19 out of 55 people tested in Alabama had hookworm. Now, hookworm is found in developing countries. We thought that we had gotten rid of that in America in the 1980s. Well, it's back. It's because there is extreme poverty. And that poverty is intentional. And that's what a lot of people also don't understand. Now, a lot of conservatives, for example, will blame this on the individual. Oh, you're just lazy. No, just get out. Bootstraps. Bootstraps, go work. Well, again, as I mentioned, a lot of these people do work. But there is the massive inequality going on here, and it is intentional. It's intentional through governmental policy that happens to reward wealthy donors and leave out regular people. Now, the report touched on that. They said that Trump's policies were deliberately designed to remove basic protections from the poorest, punish those who are not in employment, and make even basic health care into a privilege and to be earned rather than a right of citizenship. And by the way, they're not just Trump's policies. They're Republican policies. These are the policies that the Republican Party has been pushing for decades. They want this. They like these policies. They stand by these policies. Now, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights told CNN also that, quote, contempt for the poor in the United States drives cruel policies. So they do this on purpose, not only to enrich their donors, but to punish the poor, because that's what they believe. Oh, poor people are immoral. Poor people are undeserving. Therefore, we shouldn't help them. We should kick them further while they're down. Now, the UN Special Rapporteur report got the attention of Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders called on the Trump administration to, quote, take action to reduce shameful levels of poverty across the country. Now, look, that's Bernie Sanders. That's what he believes in. He's like, we shouldn't be in poverty. If you work for a living, you should actually get a living wage. I know, it's crazy, right? A crazy fringe socialist, right? Well, that's what the Trump administration would like to call him, and unfortunately a lot of centrists as well. Now, in response to that, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, she called this, quote, patently ridiculous. Not just a quote from Bernie Sanders, but also the entire report on U.S. poverty. She said it's patently ridiculous because America is the wealthiest and freest country in the world. Oh, we're so wealthy. We're so free. Yes, we're free to die without health care. Yes, we're free to live in conditions that give us hookworm, where we don't have septic tanks in Alabama. Look how wealthy we are. Look, in reality, that wealth is not being shared among the people. I mean, look, you can look at the recent Trump tax cuts, right? That Trump is claiming, oh, no, they're great for the economy. The economy is booming. Well, 83% of those gains from those tax cuts went to the rich, went to the top 1%. The average savings of somebody who is incredibly wealthy already is about $60,000 a year. That's every year. From now until forever, if those tax cuts stay in place. They're permanent. And look, the U.S. already has the most billionaires in the world. For example, Jeff Bezos, he's worth about $144 billion. Look at the level of inequality here. You have Bezos, which is worth $144 billion, as I said, and then you have people in Alabama with no sewer system. That's not right. That is what you find in an oligarchy. Now, Sanders, of course, fired back. He said, quote, you are certainly right in suggesting that poverty in many countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi, is far worse than it is in the United States. It's fair to point that out. But then again, what do Republicans like to use when you bring up the issue of poverty? Whataboutism. Well, what about those other countries that are much, much poorer? And look, you can't be poor here in America, is that famous segment on Fox News. You got a microwave. You're not poor. You got a refrigerator. You got a television or laptop. You're not poor. Stop complaining. But in America, there still is a level of poverty here that shouldn't be. He said, quote, what is important to note about poverty in America is that it takes place in the richest country in the history of the world, and at a time where wealth and income inequality is worse than at any time since the 1920s. And I want to show you a graph here that kind of illustrates that point. Let me go. We all know this graph, right? Is productivity and wages. You can see from just after 45 on, right? You got wages and productivity in tandem, growing together, exceptional growth, right? And then about 74, 75, somewhere around there, they split off. Gee, I wonder what happened that time. Giant corporate tax cuts, right? Or the introduction of the idea that money is speech and that corporations are people. You have that great divergence here. You got productivity that continues to shoot up, but you got wages that are stagnant. They haven't changed, and they still haven't changed. We're more productive than ever before, and our wages are absolutely the same. That is not right. And you might ask, where did our productivity go? It went right into the pockets of the rich. Now, Bernie Sanders continued, quote, as I'm sure you know, in America today, despite low unemployment, some 40 million people still live in poverty. More than 30 million have no health insurance. Over half of older workers have no retirement savings. 140 million Americans are struggling to pay for basic living expenses. 40% of Americans cannot afford a $400 emergency, and millions of Americans are leaving school deeply in debt. I hope you'll agree that in a nation in which the top 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half, we can and must do much better than that. As it happens, I personally believe that it's totally appropriate for the UN Special Rapporteur to focus on poverty in the United States. Boom. Look, I don't think I'm alone in thinking the United States has lagged behind the rest of the world. When you go and you look at the levels of income and wealth inequality, and you look at the conditions that people live in here in America, where Flint doesn't have clean water, still, years after they are found to have contaminated water, that it's ruined the lives of so many people in that area. And it's not just Flint. There's so many other places, too, that have contaminated water that are not getting the attention of Flint, and they're not getting fixed. We're behind the rest of the world. We don't have guaranteed health care for all. We don't have a good safety net. That's been shredded. We've got this rampant poverty, and we have a system that's just incredibly broken in every single way. Because you have corporations that are buying off the politicians. These corporations buy the politicians, and they say, what do they want? What's the one thing that they want? Tax cuts. They want tax cuts. They want deregulation. They buy the politicians, and that's what they get. Tax cuts and deregulation. And then they say, well, we got to pay for it somehow. I know. Let's take the money from the poor. Let's take the money out of Social Security. Let's take the money out of Medicare, Medicaid. Let's take the money out of food stamps. You saw the recent budget that was put forward by the Republican Party. $4.5 trillion in cuts. They're going to decimate Medicaid. They're going to change food stamps to a block grant program. They're going to change Medicare. They're going to say, let's get in private options for Medicare to compete. Instead of actually allowing people to buy into Medicare, no, you're going to keep them on the private insurance option, which has not been working. Look, this country is broken. And so, yes, the UN has every right to criticize what we're doing to our own people. We need to fix these problems. And to do that, we're going to need to get involved. We're going to need to vote. Midterms are incredibly important if you actually want to get politicians who are going to reverse this course. And if not, then we're going to keep going downhill. And I don't want to go down that road. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.